I'm Madison Hayes, 32, and last Sunday's family dinner shattered my world. When I excitedly mentioned my sister Rachel's upcoming wedding, my mom's face went ghostly pale. "There won't be a wedding," she whispered, gripping her wine glass. "Connor is your father's son." The room froze. "My sister's fiancé? Our half-brother?" Dad stammered denials while Rachel collapsed sobbing. That dinner exposed a decades-old affair that destroyed two families simultaneously. I didn't realize then that this bombshell wasn't even the real betrayal. The truly unforgivable secret? My mother had known for years and chosen this moment deliberately. Before I dive into the full story, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. This family drama changed my entire perspective on loyalty and truth. And if you've ever experienced shocking revelations that turned your world upside down, you'll understand exactly what I went through. Hit that subscribe button if you want more real family stories like mine, and give this video a thumbs up if you believe family secrets always find their way to the surface eventually. Now, let me take you back to where it all started. Growing up with Rachel was like living in the shadow of a supernova. My younger sister, just 3 years behind me at 29, had always been our family's golden child. While I pursued a practical career in healthcare administration, Rachel floated through life collecting accomplishments and admirers with effortless grace. She had the perfect grades, perfect friends, and most importantly to our parents, the perfect appearance. "Madison, why can't you put a little more effort into your presentation?" Mom would ask while helping Rachel prepare for another pageant or social event. I'd just shrug and return to my textbooks, telling myself I preferred substance over style. But the truth was, I'd learned early that competing with Rachel was futile. Robert and Catherine Hayes had made their preference clear without ever saying it directly. Don't get me wrong, I loved my sister deeply. Her warmth and enthusiasm were genuine. Rachel never intentionally stole the spotlight, it just naturally followed her. And when she met Connor Wilson at that charity gala 2 years ago, I was genuinely happy for her. The way she described their meeting sounded like something from a romance novel. He was volunteering at the silent auction table. "Maddie," she'd gushed during our weekly sister brunch. Our hands touched when we both reached for the same donation card, and I swear I felt electricity. Is that insanely cliché? Connor was handsome, successful, and kind, a corporate lawyer with a pro bono practice helping domestic violence survivors. Their courtship was a whirlwind of romantic gestures and perfect Instagram moments. Within 6 months, he'd proposed during a hot air balloon ride at sunset. Rachel's princess fantasy had come true. The families met several times after the engagement announcement. The Wilsons seemed lovely. James was a retired professor, Elaine, a pediatric nurse. But something had always felt off during those gatherings. Dad would become strangely withdrawn whenever Elaine spoke, and I'd caught them avoiding direct interaction at every family meeting. "They just have different personalities," Mom had explained when I mentioned the tension. "Your father thinks James is pretentious with all his academic references." The wedding planning consumed our family for months. Every Sunday dinner became a forum for discussing flower arrangements, venue options, and guest lists. My parents spared no expense. Dad jokingly referred to his retirement fund as the Rachel wedding account. "When your time comes, Madison, we'll do the same for you," he promised, though we both knew my practical nature would never demand such extravagance. Despite my complicated feelings, the familiar mixture of genuine happiness for Rachel, tinged with the shadow of always being second best, I threw myself into my maid of honor duties. I organized the bridal shower, managed the bridesmaid group chat, and spent weekends addressing invitations in my neatest handwriting. "I don't know what I'd do without you, Maddie," Rachel said one evening as we assembled wedding favors in my apartment. "You're the only one who keeps me sane through all this craziness." That comment had warmed me more than she knew. I might never be the favorite daughter, but being Rachel's rock meant something special. Our relationship had grown stronger in adulthood, evolving from childhood rivalry into genuine friendship, which is why that fateful Sunday dinner hit me so hard. It wasn't just about the shocking revelation. It was about watching my sister's perfect world implode in real time, and feeling completely powerless to protect her from the fallout. The dinner had been planned as a final wedding detail discussion before the Wilsons would join us for dessert. Just the four of us, Mom, Dad, Rachel, and me, finalizing the last-minute arrangements 6 weeks before the big day. None of us could have predicted how that evening would change everything forever. Sunday, family dinners at my parents' suburban colonial had followed the same pattern for decades. Mom would spend all day cooking something elaborate. Dad would pour the wine, and conversation would flow predictably through work stories, neighborhood gossip, and gentle ribbing. But this particular Sunday, something felt off from the moment I arrived. The house looked the same immaculate furnishings that prioritized appearance over comfort, family photos arranged to showcase Rachel's milestones prominently. But Mom seemed distracted, moving around the kitchen with uncharacteristic clumsiness. She'd already emptied one wine glass before we even sat down to eat. "Catherine, maybe slow down a bit," Dad suggested as she poured herself another generous serving of Cabernet. "I'm fine, Robert," she snapped, an edge to her voice I rarely heard. Dad looked uncomfortable throughout dinner, checking his phone repeatedly and contributing little to the conversation. He'd always been the jovial one, quick with dad jokes and eager to discuss his latest woodworking project. Tonight, he seemed like he wanted to be anywhere else. Rachel didn't notice the tension, bubbling with excitement about final wedding arrangements. She'd just confirmed the doves for the release after the ceremony, finalized the seating chart, and had her final dress fitting scheduled for Tuesday. "The seamstress says the beadwork on the train is the most intricate she's ever done," Rachel said, her eyes shining. "Connor hasn't seen it, of course. He's being so traditional about everything." "Speaking of Connor," I interjected, "I finished assembling all the wedding favors yesterday. His idea to donate to the domestic violence shelter instead of giving out trinkets was really thoughtful." That's when everything changed. Mom's hand froze midway to her mouth, wine glass trembling slightly. Her face drained of color so dramatically that I thought she might faint. "Mom, are you okay?" Rachel asked, putting down her fork. Mom set down her glass carefully, almost mechanically. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "There won't be a wedding." The room went silent. Dad's head snapped up from his plate, eyes wide with something that looked like terror. "What are you talking about?" Rachel laughed nervously. "Of course there will be. Connor is your father's son." The words hung in the air like poison. Rachel's laugh died instantly. "That's not funny, Mom." "Catherine, what the hell?" Dad's face flushed crimson. "That's absolutely not true. 32 years ago, with Elaine. Before she married James, Mom's words came out measured, each one a deliberate dagger. Connor is your half-brother, Rachel." Rachel's fork clattered to her plate. "That's impossible." "Dad, tell her it's impossible." Dad was stammering, his composure completely shattered. There was. It was one night. A conference in Chicago, but Connor can't be the timing. The horror of realization washed over me as I processed what was happening. My father had an affair with Elaine Wilson over 3 decades ago. Connor, born just a year after me, could potentially be my half-brother. And if that was true, my sister had been engaged to our own blood relative. Rachel suddenly bolted from the table and vomited violently into the decorative plant in the corner. Mom didn't even flinch at the mess. Mom, who normally would have had a conniption over a water ring on the coffee table. I sat frozen, trying to process the information while simultaneously trying to calculate what to do next. Someone needed to take control of the situation, but everyone seemed to be disintegrating before my eyes. "How long have you known?" I managed to ask Mom, who was staring at her wine glass as if the answers might be swirling in the dark liquid. "I suspected when we first met him at the engagement dinner. He has Robert's eyes. His hands. The way he tilts his head when he's listening closely." Mom's voice was eerily calm now. "But I confirmed it recently." Before any of us could respond, the doorbell rang. The Wilsons had arrived for dessert, right on schedule, walking directly into ground zero of a family nuclear explosion. I moved on autopilot to answer the door. Connor stood there smiling, holding a bakery box, flanked by his parents. Elaine's eyes met mine, and something flickered there: recognition, fear, guilt. Before she composed herself, "Madison, we brought tiramisu from that Italian place Rachel loves," Connor said, completely oblivious to the catastrophe awaiting him. I couldn't find words. From the dining room came the sound of Rachel's anguished crying. Connor's smile faltered, and he pushed past me toward the sound, protective instinct driving him toward the woman he loved. "Rachel? What's wrong? What happened?" I turned just in time to see Rachel's face contort with horror at the sight of him. She screamed a primal, guttural sound I'd never heard from my poised, perfect sister. "Don't touch me! You're my brother! You're my fucking brother!" Her words echoed through the house as she collapsed onto the floor. Connor stood paralyzed, confusion washing over his features. "What? Rachel, what are you talking about?" Behind him, Elaine Wilson swayed slightly, gripping the doorframe for support. Her husband turned to her, recognition dawning on his face as pieces of a 32-year-old puzzle suddenly fell into place. In that moment, watching two families simultaneously implode, I had no idea that the bombshell revelation about Connor's paternity wasn't even the worst betrayal in the room. That would come later, when I discovered just how calculated my mother's timing had been and why. Rachel's engagement effectively ended that night, though it would take weeks for everyone to accept the new reality. Connor refused to believe the accusation, demanding proof rather than family rumors. "This is insane," he kept repeating as James guided him and a shell-shocked Elaine to their car. "There has to be a mistake. Rachel, please, we need to talk about this rationally." But Rachel had locked herself in her old bedroom, refusing to come out or speak to anyone. The sound of her sobbing followed the Wilsons down the driveway. With everyone else falling apart, I somehow found myself taking control. The healthcare administrator in me emerged, pragmatic and solution-focused despite my own emotional turmoil. "We need DNA tests," I announced firmly as Dad slumped at the dining table, head in his hands. "Before we destroy two families completely, we need scientific proof." Mom nodded absently, still unnervingly calm. "I'll make the arrangements tomorrow." The next 2 weeks were the longest of my life. Rachel moved temporarily into my apartment but barely spoke or ate. She took emergency leave from her job at the architectural firm and spent most days curled in the fetal position on my guest bed. I split my time between caring for Rachel, going to work, and conducting my own investigation into our family history. Something about the timing of Mom's revelation felt calculated, and questions nagged at me. Why now, after 6 months of expensive wedding planning? Why in such a public, devastating way? "I need to understand," I told Rachel one evening as I coaxed her to eat some soup. "If Connor is really Dad's son, there must be records, photos, something from that time period." "I don't care about the how," Rachel whispered, her first full sentence in days. "I just keep thinking about the what." 2 years, Maddie. 2 years of falling in love with, kissing, planning a future with. She couldn't finish the sentence before fresh tears overtook her. I waited until she fell asleep, then dove into old family photo albums I'd brought from my parents' house. Looking at pictures from around my birth year with new eyes, I noticed strange gaps in the timeline. Mom and Dad's vacation to Hawaii when I was 8 months old had apparently included a business conference in Chicago, a detail never mentioned in family stories. There was a strained quality to my parents' expressions in photos from that era that I'd never noticed before. Dad's work travel schedule showed multiple trips to the Midwest around that time. Small details, but they started forming a pattern. After a week of investigation, I confronted my father alone at his workshop in the garage, the only place he'd ever shown vulnerability. "Tell me everything," I demanded, closing the door behind me. "The whole truth, Dad. Rachel is destroying herself, and we need answers." Dad's shoulders slumped as he set down his sanding block. He looked decades older than his 58 years. "It was once, Madison. A stupid mistake at a medical conference where I was presenting research. Your mother and I were having problems after your birth. Sleep deprivation, financial stress, typical new parent struggles." He wiped his eyes. Elaine was a young nurse attending the conference. We had too much to drink at the hotel bar. I've regretted it every day since. "Did you know Connor might be yours?" I pressed. "No." His response was immediate and forceful. Elaine never contacted me afterward. The timing lined up with when she started dating James. I assumed I convinced myself that Connor had to be his. I never thought our paths would cross again, let alone that our children would meet. I believed him. The devastation etched on his face couldn't be fabricated. But it didn't explain everything. Why would Mom wait until now to say something? She claims she suspected since meeting Connor 6 months ago. Dad shook his head helplessly. I don't know. When she first mentioned her suspicions to me last week, I begged her to wait until we had proof. I wanted to approach the Wilsons privately, handle it with as little damage as possible. That revelation hit me hard. Mom had discussed her suspicions with Dad before the dinner. This wasn't a spontaneous outburst. The public reveal had been a choice. Meanwhile, I was struggling with my own identity crisis. If Connor was my half-brother, what other family truths had been hidden from me? Was my entire life narrative built on carefully constructed lies? I found myself staring at my reflection, searching for traces of my father in Connor's features. We had similar eye shapes, I realized with a jolt. The same, slightly uneven smile. Details I'd never noticed before but now seemed glaringly obvious. When the DNA test results finally arrived, the clinical language of genetic markers and probability statistics confirmed what we already feared. Connor Wilson was indeed my half-brother, sharing approximately 25% of his DNA with me, consistent with paternal half-siblings. Rachel received the news with eerie calm, as if the confirmation was merely a formality after her emotional collapse. Connor, who had maintained desperate hope for a mistake, requested a second test before finally accepting the truth. Our families were forever connected through a bond that had destroyed what should have been a joyous union. But as devastating as this revelation was, I still didn't understand why my mother had chosen to detonate it in the most destructive way possible. That mystery would lead me to an even darker family secret. When the official results arrived, confirming that Connor was indeed my half-brother, sharing the same father, the revelation sent new shockwaves through both families. Rachel, who had maintained a fragile composure during the waiting period, disappeared into herself completely. She wouldn't answer calls or texts, even from me, and took indefinite leave from her job. Connor's reaction was different. Anger replaced his initial disbelief. He directed his fury primarily at his mother, demanding to know if she had suspected the truth all along. I thought there might be a possibility, Elaine admitted during a tense meeting I arranged at a neutral coffee shop. Her hands trembled around her mug. The timing aligned with both relationships. But James and I had already been dating when I discovered I was pregnant, and James was so happy. I convinced myself it had to be his. You let me fall in love with my sister, Connor said, his voice breaking. You watched us plan a wedding. How could you not say something? I didn't know for certain, Elaine whispered, tears streaming down her face. And by the time I started having serious doubts, you were already engaged. I was trying to figure out how to handle it when Catherine made her announcement. Something about her phrasing caught my attention. My mother's announcement as if it had been planned, not a spontaneous revelation. While our families struggled to process this new reality, I continued my investigation, driven by the nagging sense that we still didn't have the complete truth. If Mom had suspected Connor's paternity for months, why wait until wedding plans were nearly finalized to reveal it? The answer came from an unexpected source. While searching through Mom's home office for birth certificates, I found a receipt tucked into her planner. It was from Westfield Investigations, dated 6 months earlier, almost immediately after Rachel and Connor's engagement party. My mother had hired a private investigator. I confronted her that evening, laying the receipt on the kitchen counter between us. "What is this?" I demanded, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Mom glanced at the paper, then calmly continued chopping vegetables. I needed to be certain before saying anything. "This is dated the week after you met Connor for the first time. You didn't just have a suspicion based on his appearance. You actively investigated him. Wouldn't you want to know if your daughter was marrying her brother?" She said it so matter-of-factly that I felt physically ill. "But you waited 6 months to say something. After tens of thousands spent on wedding preparations. After Rachel was completely invested emotionally. After both families were intertwined. Why not speak up immediately if you suspected?" Mom set down her knife and looked at me directly for the first time. I was waiting for the right time. The right time? I echoed incredulously. Was destroying Rachel at a family dinner with maximum dramatic effect your idea of the right time? Something shifted in my mother's eyes, then a fleeting expression that sent chills down my spine. It almost looked like satisfaction. That night, unable to sleep, I returned to my parents' house after Mom had gone to bed. Dad was staying at a hotel, their relationship fractured by the revelations. I needed answers that I knew wouldn't come from direct questioning. In Mom's closet, behind her winter coats, I found a locked box I remembered from childhood. She'd always claimed it contained old financial records. Using a hairpin to trigger the simple lock a trick Rachel had taught me when we were teenagers, I opened it to find several journals spanning decades. I took them back to my apartment and spent the night reading by lamplight, my horror growing with each page. The journals revealed a woman I didn't recognize, one who had harbored deep resentment toward my father for years after discovering his one-night stand through an accidentally found hotel receipt. A woman who deeply resented Rachel for being Robert's obvious favorite, the daughter who had his dimples and shared his creative talents. Most disturbingly, entries from 6 months ago confirmed my worst suspicions. Mom had recognized Connor immediately at the engagement dinner. Not just from his resemblance to Dad, but because she had secretly tracked Elaine over the years, monitoring the child that resulted from her husband's infidelity. But the truly shocking revelation came in an entry dated just 3 weeks after the engagement announcement. It's almost poetic justice. Robert's precious favorite daughter falling in love with his illegitimate son. I could stop it now, but watching them plan this doomed wedding, seeing Robert dote on Rachel and her perfect match, knowing what I know, there's a symmetry to it. The longer I wait, the more devastating the revelation will be. Sometimes justice requires patience. The journal slipped from my fingers. This hadn't been a reluctant revelation of an uncomfortable truth. It had been calculated revenge, meticulously planned to cause maximum damage to both Rachel and our father. My mother had deliberately orchestrated the most painful scenario possible. Further entries revealed even more disturbing details. Mom had not only suspected Connor's paternity, she had received confirmation from the private investigator months ago. She had watched Rachel try on wedding dresses, helped select invitations, discussed floral arrangements, all while knowing the relationship was doomed. She had deliberately chosen a moment when the Wilsons would arrive, ensuring the most public, humiliating revelation possible. When I confronted her the next day with the journals, something in her facade finally cracked. 30 years, she said, her voice cold. 30 years I've lived with his betrayal, watching him dote on her while I raised you practically alone. Rachel always came first, his special girl, his princess. Do you have any idea what that's like? So you punished Rachel? Your own daughter? She's the innocent one in all this. She needed to see her perfect father for what he really is, Mom replied. And he needed to lose what he values most. I stared at this woman I'd known my whole life, suddenly a stranger. What about Connor, the Wilsons? Did they deserve to be collateral damage in your revenge scheme? For the first time, uncertainty flickered across her features. Elaine made her choice when she slept with my husband. And Connor? What was his choice in this? She had no answer for that. As I left my childhood home that day, journal evidence in hand, I realized the DNA test had revealed more than biological connections. It had exposed the true anatomy of our family, the resentments, jealousies, and betrayals that had festered beneath the surface of our seemingly perfect lives for decades. Rachel deserved to know the full truth, no matter how painful. And somehow, we needed to find a path forward through this wreckage. But first, I needed to be there for my sister, whose world had been destroyed not just by fate but by our mother's deliberate cruelty. If you've ever discovered that someone you trusted completely was capable of unimaginable betrayal, you know how earth-shattering it feels. Nothing prepares you for realizing the story of your family was built on lies. Stay with me as I tell you how Rachel and I navigated the aftermath of these revelations, and the shocking discovery that would make everything even more complicated. If this story resonates with you, please hit the like button. It helps more people find these real family stories and reminds all of us that we're not alone in our struggles with family secrets. After discovering the full extent of my mother's deception, I knew I needed to reach out to Rachel. She had moved in with her friend Jenna after refusing to stay in my apartment or return to our parents' house. For 2 weeks, she'd maintained minimal contact with anyone, sending only occasional texts to let me know she was still alive. "Rachel, we need to talk," I texted her. "Not about Connor or the wedding. About Mom, please. Neutral territory, that coffee shop on Maple you like." To my surprise, she agreed. When she walked into the cafe the next day, I barely recognized my vibrant sister. She'd lost weight, her normally perfect appearance disheveled. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her engagement ring was conspicuously absent. "You look awful," she said as she slid into the booth across from me, attempting her old humor. "Look who's talking," I replied, grateful for even this small moment of normalcy between us. After ordering drinks, I showed her the journal entries. Her hands trembled as she read, tears silently tracking down her cheeks. "She knew," Rachel whispered. "She knew the whole time. She watched me plan everything, helped me choose the venue, the dress." Her voice broke. "I told her how much I loved him, Maddie. I told her I'd never been happier." And she just smiled and nodded, knowing what she was going to do. I reached across the table and squeezed her hands. "I'm so sorry, Rach. I had no idea she could be so calculating. What kind of mother does this to her own daughter?" The pain in Rachel's voice cut straight through me. One who's been nurturing resentment for decades. This wasn't about you, really. You were collateral damage in her revenge against Dad. Rachel looked up, her eyes suddenly sharp with anger. "Don't minimize this. She targeted my happiness specifically because it would hurt Dad the most. She used me as a weapon." She was right, and her clarity surprised me. The perfectionist princess had been replaced by someone harder, more perceptive. "There's something else you need to know," Rachel said after a long silence. Her voice dropped to a near whisper. "I'm pregnant." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "Almost 3 months. I was waiting to tell everyone after the wedding." The implications crashed down around us. My sister was carrying her half-brother's child. The genetic complications, the social stigma, the impossible choices ahead, it was too much to process. "Have you told Connor?" I asked gently. "How can I? How do you even start that conversation?" Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "But he has a right to know, doesn't he? God, Maddie, what am I going to do?" In that moment, something fundamental shifted between us. All our lives, I had been the responsible but overlooked older sister, while Rachel had been the golden child. Now, she was broken, vulnerable, looking to me for guidance. The old jealousies and resentments that had colored our relationship seemed suddenly petty and insignificant. "First, you're going to move in with me," I said firmly. "No more hiding at Jenna's. Second, we'll make an appointment with a genetic counselor to understand the medical implications. Third, yes, Connor needs to know, but I can help with that conversation if you want." For the first time since the revelation, Rachel looked at me with something like hope. "You'd do that?" "You're my sister," I said simply. "We're going to get through this together." Over the next week, Rachel moved into my apartment, and we established a new routine. I became her protector, screening calls from our parents and fielding questions from confused friends about the suddenly canceled wedding. The meeting with the genetic counselor was difficult but informative. The doctor explained the increased risks associated with consanguineous relationships, but also emphasized that many of the most serious concerns came from generations of such relationships, not isolated incidents. Many cultures have practiced cousin marriage for centuries with limited genetic consequences, the counselor explained. Half-sibling relationships carry higher risks, but they're not as catastrophic as many people assume, especially with modern prenatal screening. This information provided some relief, but didn't solve the fundamental ethical and emotional complexities of the situation. After much discussion, Rachel decided she wanted to continue the pregnancy, regardless of the challenges ahead. "This baby is innocent," she said, hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. "None of this is their fault." With Rachel's permission, I contacted Connor. He had retreated to a family cabin in the mountains, trying to process his own new reality. "Connor, it's Madison," I said when he answered. "We need to talk. It's important about Rachel. Is she okay?" His immediate concern for her welfare, despite everything, told me volumes about his character. "Physically, yes. But there's something you need to know, and it would be better in person." He agreed to meet us at a park halfway between our locations. The encounter was painfully awkward the first time we'd been face to face since discovering we were siblings. I studied him openly now, seeing my father's features clearly where I'd never noticed them before. The shape of his eyes, the set of his jaw, the way he gestured when explaining something. How had we all missed it? When Rachel told him about the pregnancy, he went completely still. For several minutes, no one spoke, the weight of this new complication settling over us. "What do you want to do?" he finally asked Rachel, his voice gentle. "I want to keep it," she said quietly. "But I understand if you don't want to be involved." Connor ran his hands through his hair, another gesture identical to my father's. "This is a lot. I need some time to think. But this is my child, too, regardless of everything else. I won't abandon either of you." As surreal as it sounds, that park meeting marked the beginning of a strange new dynamic between the three of us. We weren't a couple and a sister anymore, but we weren't just siblings either. We were something unprecedented, navigating uncharted emotional territory without a map. Over the following weeks, Connor and I developed an unexpected connection. The biological link we shared created a foundation of familiarity, even as we were essentially strangers learning about each other. We discovered shared interests in history and hiking that neither of us had mentioned during the engagement period. "It's weird," he admitted during one of our conversations. "I always wanted a sibling growing up. Just not like this. And definitely not while falling in love with another sibling I didn't know I had." Through all this, Rachel began to heal. The morning sickness passed, and a subtle glow replaced her initial devastation. My previously perfect sister revealed a strength I'd never fully appreciated before. One evening, as we sorted through wedding gifts that would need to be returned, Rachel paused, holding a crystal vase. "You know what's strange, Maddie? For years I felt like I was living this charmed life, the favorite daughter with the perfect fiancé and dream wedding on the horizon. But I was never as happy as I thought I should be. There was always this pressure to maintain the facade." She set down the vase carefully. "Now everything's shattered, and somehow, I feel more real than I ever have before." Does that make any sense? It made perfect sense. My sister was finally seeing beyond the golden child narrative that had defined her and our relationship for decades. But while Rachel, Connor, and I were slowly forging a path forward, I was still uncovering layers of my mother's deception that would shake both our families to the core. With Rachel's pregnancy adding urgency to our situation, I intensified my investigation into my mother's machinations. Something about her calculated revenge still didn't add up. How had she tracked Elaine and Connor over the years? And why had no other family members ever mentioned the resemblance between Connor and our father? I started with Aunt Vivian, my mother's younger sister, who had always been more forthcoming than the rest of the family. After swearing her to secrecy about Rachel's pregnancy, I casually brought up Connor's resemblance to Dad. "Oh, honey." Aunt Vivian sighed, her expression confirming my suspicions. "I wondered when someone would notice." "You knew?" I couldn't hide my shock. "All this time?" She nodded reluctantly. "Several of us had our suspicions when we met him at the engagement party. The timing lined up with that medical conference your father attended. But your mother asked us not to say anything until she had confirmation." "Asked you not to say anything? When?" "About 6 months ago, right after we all met Connor. She said she was handling it privately and would tell Rachel at the appropriate time." The pieces were falling into place. Mom hadn't just recognized Connor by chance, she had orchestrated a family-wide conspiracy of silence, ensuring she controlled exactly when and how the truth would be revealed. Digging deeper, I contacted several other relatives who reluctantly admitted they'd had similar conversations with my mother. Each had been sworn to secrecy with the promise that Mom was managing the situation delicately. The most disturbing revelation came from my grandmother's caregiver, Lucia, whom I tracked down at the nursing home where she now worked. Grandmother had passed away 3 years earlier, but Lucia remembered a strange bedside conversation. "Your grandmother was very agitated near the end," Lucia explained. "She kept insisting on speaking to your mother alone. After their conversation, your mother left looking, I don't know how to describe it, like she'd received ammunition she'd been waiting for. I felt a chill." "Do you remember when this happened?" "It was definitely right before the end. Maybe 3 days before your grandmother passed." The timing aligned perfectly with when Rachel had first mentioned meeting Connor at work events, before they officially began dating. I pieced together a timeline that made my blood run cold. My grandmother had apparently revealed something on her deathbed about Connor's paternity. Perhaps she had kept track of Elaine over the years, or recognized James Wilson's name from academic circles. Rather than warning Rachel immediately, Mom had stored this information like a weapon, waiting for the perfect moment to detonate it. Most shocking of all, I found evidence that Mom had not merely recognized Connor after meeting him, she had actively manipulated events to ensure Rachel and Connor's paths crossed in the first place. Connor's Aunt Patricia, who had initially introduced him to the charity gala where he met Rachel, turned out to be an old college friend of my mother's. When I met with Patricia under the pretense of returning some of Connor's belongings, she innocently revealed the truth. "Oh, your mother was so clever about the whole thing," Patricia said, unaware of the devastation the relationship had caused. She mentioned that her daughter was volunteering at the gala and suggested I encourage Connor to help out too, said they might hit it off. She was certainly right about that. The full scope of my mother's malice became clear. She hadn't merely recognized her husband's illegitimate son and waited for a cruel moment to reveal the truth. She had engineered the entire relationship, deliberately encouraging her daughter to fall in love with her half-brother, all to exact maximum revenge on my father for a decades-old infidelity. Armed with this evidence, I confronted my mother at her house. Dad had moved out permanently by then, the marriage effectively over. "You introduced them on purpose," I said, laying out the evidence piece by piece. "You orchestrated their meeting through Patricia. You watched them fall in love, knowing they were siblings. You encouraged the relationship every step of the way." For the first time, my mother's composed facade cracked completely. The mask of the perfect suburban wife slipped away, revealing the bitter, vengeful woman beneath. 30 years, she hissed. 30 years I lived with the knowledge of his betrayal, watching him dote on his precious Rachel. Do you have any idea what it's like to raise your husband's favorite child while knowing there's another one out there he doesn't even acknowledge? So you punished Rachel? Your own daughter? What kind of mother does that? I gave her the truth. The truth Robert denied all of us for decades. "No," I said, finally seeing my mother clearly. "You wanted her to fall in love before you destroyed her. You wanted to maximize the pain. This wasn't about truth, it was about revenge. At any cost." The most chilling part was that she didn't deny it. Instead, a small, satisfied smile played at her lips. "Sometimes justice takes patience," she said, echoing her journal entry. I left my childhood home that day, knowing I could never look at my mother the same way again. The woman who had raised me, taught me right from wrong, had orchestrated one of the cruelest psychological tortures imaginable against her own daughter. The knowledge weighed heavily as I drove home to Rachel. How could I tell her that our mother hadn't merely revealed an uncomfortable truth, but had deliberately set her up to fall in love with Connor in the first place? That every moment of their relationship had been part of an elaborate revenge scheme? But secrets had already caused enough damage in our family. Rachel deserved the complete truth, no matter how painful. And both families needed to confront the full extent of Catherine Hayes' manipulation before we could begin to heal. With evidence compiled and my resolve firm, I called an emergency family meeting that would bring everyone face to face with the architect of our collective tragedy. Arranging for both families to gather in the same room was no easy task. Dad had been staying at a hotel. The Wilsons were understandably reluctant to face us again, and Rachel initially refused to be in the same room as our mother. But after sharing what I'd discovered, everyone agreed that we needed to confront the full truth together. I chose neutral territory, a private room at a local community center where I volunteered. On a Sunday afternoon, both shattered families assembled. The tension so thick it felt difficult to breathe. Dad arrived first, looking haggard and aged beyond his years. The Wilsons came next, James supporting Elaine, who had lost significant weight since I'd last seen her. Connor entered separately, nodding stiffly to me before taking a seat as far from Rachel as possible. My sister arrived last, her face set in determined lines, one hand resting protectively over her still-hidden pregnancy. Mom walked in exactly on time, impeccably dressed as always, seemingly unfazed by the emotional devastation surrounding her. The room went silent as she took her seat, crossing her legs primly as if at a garden club meeting rather than a family reckoning. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my healthcare administrator voice steady despite my churning emotions. "I've asked you here because what happened to our families wasn't a random tragedy or an unfortunate coincidence. It was deliberately orchestrated, and we all deserve to know the full truth." I methodically presented the evidence I'd gathered: the private investigator receipt, journal entries, conversations with relatives, and Connor's Aunt Patricia. With each revelation, the room's atmosphere grew heavier. Mom didn't just recognize Connor as Dad's son and reluctantly reveal it, I concluded, looking directly at my mother. She actively arranged for Rachel and Connor to meet through her old friend Patricia. She encouraged their relationship for 6 months, while privately confirming they were siblings. She planned the most publicly devastating moment possible to reveal the truth. Rachel let out a small, broken sound. Connor's face had gone completely white. "Is this true, Catherine?" Dad asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mom adjusted her bracelet calmly. "I merely facilitated an introduction. What happened afterward was natural attraction genetics, recognizing genetics, I suppose." "You watched me fall in love with my brother," Rachel said, her voice shaking. "You helped me plan our wedding. You went dress shopping with me. I gave you the truth your father denied all of us. By using me like a pawn? By letting me plan a life with Connor before destroying both of us?" Mom's composure finally cracked. "Do you have any idea what it's like watching your husband favor one child so completely? To know there's another child out there he created while betraying you? To spend decades being the perfect wife while carrying that knowledge? So you punished Rachel?" Dad stood suddenly, his face flushed with anger. "Our daughter, who had nothing to do with what happened between us? You made her your princess from the day she was born," Mom spat back. "Madison could have moved mountains and you wouldn't have noticed. But precious Rachel just had to smile and you were at her feet. I watched it for 29 years. I figured she could handle one disappointment." The casual cruelty of that statement seemed to suck all the oxygen from the room. Rachel's face crumpled, and Connor instinctively moved toward her before stopping himself, the new reality of their relationship reasserting itself. "And what about my son?" James Wilson spoke up, his academic composure giving way to raw pain. "What about Connor? Was he just collateral damage in your revenge fantasy?" "Elaine made her choice when she slept with my husband," Mom replied coldly. "I made a mistake 32 years ago," Elaine said, tears streaming down her face. "One night, one terrible judgment call when I was young and foolish. I've paid for it every day since, living with the fear and uncertainty. But Connor is innocent. He didn't deserve any of this. And I didn't deserve being lied to for 30 years, Mom countered. I watched my mother attempt to justify her actions, seeing for the first time the depth of bitterness that had corrupted her. This woman had raised me, taught me values, kissed my scraped knees, and checked for monsters under my bed. How could she also be capable of such calculated cruelty? "There's something else you all need to know," Rachel said suddenly, her voice surprisingly steady. She looked at Connor briefly before continuing. "I'm pregnant. Almost 4 months now." The announcement landed like another bomb in the already devastated room. Mom's face registered genuine shock for the first time. This complication apparently hadn't factored into her revenge scenario. "The genetic counselor says there are increased risks," Rachel continued, "but not as severe as people might think. Connor and I are working with specialists to understand all our options." Dad sank back into his chair, overwhelmed by this new development. James and Elaine exchanged glances of concern and confusion. Connor stared at the floor, his shoulders tight with tension. "So congratulations, Mom," Rachel finished bitterly. "Your plan worked even better than you intended. You didn't just ruin my relationship, you created an innocent life who will have to navigate the consequences of your revenge." Mom's perfect facade finally shattered completely. For a brief moment, I glimpsed something like regret in her eyes before she masked it with defensive anger. "I never intended—" "That's the problem," I interrupted. "You never considered the full consequences of your actions. You were so focused on hurting Dad that you didn't care who else got caught in the crossfire, including your own daughters." Dad stood up again, his decision visibly crystallizing. "Catherine, I'm filing for divorce. What happened between Elaine and me was wrong, but what you've done is unforgivable. You used our daughter as a weapon. You'd leave me? After 34 years of marriage? Mom's voice rose incredulously. You left our marriage the moment you decided revenge was more important than our children's happiness. The Wilson family had drawn together during this exchange, James's arm protectively around Elaine's shoulders, Connor standing close to his parents. Despite everything, they still presented a united front. My family, by contrast, had splintered beyond recognition. I think we all need to consider where we go from here, James said finally, his academic manner reasserting itself. Regardless of past mistakes, we have a new life to consider now. A child who will need all of us to put aside our differences and create some kind of functional family structure. His rational approach cut through the emotional chaos, reminding us that we needed to find a way forward, however unconventional. As the meeting concluded, Mom left alone, rigid with anger and humiliation. Dad departed soon after, stopping briefly to embrace Rachel and assure her of his support no matter what she decided about the pregnancy. The Wilsons lingered, clearly struggling to process everything but determined to handle the situation with dignity. Connor approached Rachel cautiously. Whatever you decide, he told her quietly, I want to be involved. This isn't how either of us imagined starting a family, but that child is innocent in all this. Rachel nodded, too emotional to speak. For the first time since the revelation, she didn't flinch when Connor stood near her, a small but significant step. As everyone finally left, I stayed behind to clean up the room, my mind racing with all that had transpired. Our family had been irreparably altered, yet somehow this confrontation had cleared the air, creating space for something new to emerge from the wreckage. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. Can you come over? I don't want to be alone tonight. Despite the devastation, one truth had emerged clearly from the ruins of our family. The bond between sisters had not only survived but grown stronger. In the face of our mother's betrayal, Rachel and I had found in each other the unconditional love and support that had been missing from our childhood. 3 months after the confrontation, I helped Rachel move into a small but charming apartment across town. At 7 months pregnant, her belly had finally become too obvious to hide, and she'd made the difficult decision to leave her job at the architectural firm rather than face the inevitable questions and gossip. I can't believe how much stuff I've accumulated, she sighed as I carried in yet another box labeled kitchen. Remember when I used to make fun of your minimalist lifestyle? I smiled, remembering how Rachel's previous apartment had been decorated like a showcase home, everything perfect and camera-ready. This new place was different, warm, a little mismatched, but undeniably cozy. How are you feeling about tomorrow? I asked carefully, referring to the family dinner we'd planned the first time both families would gather since the confrontation. Rachel arranged a set of mismatched mugs on an open shelf. Nervous, but ready, I think. The baby kicks every time I get anxious now, like she's reminding me to stay calm. The pregnancy had progressed well despite its complicated circumstances. Genetic counseling and extensive testing had revealed no concerning abnormalities, and Rachel had recently learned she was having a girl. The knowledge seemed to give her a sense of purpose beyond her own grief. Connor had been present for every medical appointment, maintaining a careful balance between involvement and appropriate distance. The dynamic between him and Rachel remained complex, a mixture of shared history, lingering attraction they both worked to suppress, and the new reality of their biological connection. What surprised me most during those months was how the Wilson family had responded to the situation. Rather than distancing themselves from the scandal, James and Elaine had shown remarkable compassion toward Rachel. Elaine, in particular, seemed determined to support the mother of her grandchild, perhaps seeking redemption for her role in the original affair. Dad had thrown himself into preparations for the baby, building a crib and changing table in his new workshop. The divorce proceedings with Mom had begun, with Dad moving permanently into a small house across town. The separation seemed to have lifted a weight from him. He looked younger, less burdened, despite everything. Mom remained the only holdout. After the confrontation, she had retreated into rigid denial about her role in the tragedy. She'd made several attempts to contact Rachel, sending expensive baby gifts that my sister returned unopened. Each package came with a carefully worded note expressing concern without actual apology or acknowledgement of wrongdoing. "Have you heard from her this week?" Rachel asked, as if reading my thoughts. I shook my head. "Not since she tried to get me to convince you to attend family therapy with her." "Without her admitting what she did?" "No thanks." Rachel's voice was firm but not bitter. She'd moved beyond anger into something more like resigned acceptance of our mother's fundamental brokenness. The doorbell rang, interrupting our conversation. It was Connor, arriving with the crib mattress and several bags of baby supplies. "I got everything on the list," he said, setting down his loads carefully. "And my mom sent this." He handed Rachel a handmade quilt in soft yellows and greens. Rachel ran her fingers over the intricate stitching, tears welling in her eyes. "She's been working on it for weeks," Connor explained. "Said every grandchild should have a quilt made with love." The generosity of this gesture from Elaine, a woman who had every reason to distance herself from our complicated situation, moved me deeply. Somehow, in the midst of this impossible scenario, people were finding ways to be kind, to prioritize the innocent life that would soon join our unconventional family. The next evening, we gathered at Dad's new house for dinner. It was a strange assortment: Dad, James and Elaine, Connor, Rachel, and me. 6 people connected by blood, betrayal, and the imminent arrival of a child who would further complicate our family tree. "I want to propose a toast," James said as we sat around the table. The former professor had emerged as an unexpected source of wisdom and stability during the past months. "To new beginnings, and to the family we choose to be, despite the circumstances that brought us here." We raised our glasses, the simple gesture somehow profound in its acknowledgement of our shared commitment to move forward. "Have you decided on a name yet?" Elaine asked Rachel. Rachel glanced at Connor before answering. "Lily. It means pure and innocent." "Perfect," Dad said softly. As dinner progressed, conversation flowed more easily than any of us had expected. James and Dad discovered a shared interest in woodworking. Elaine offered Rachel advice about newborn care based on her years as a pediatric nurse. Connor and I fell into a comfortable sibling dynamic that no longer felt strange. Watching these interactions, I realized something remarkable was happening. From the ashes of 2 shattered families, something new was emerging, not perfect, not conventional, but genuine and surprisingly strong. Later, as Rachel and I washed dishes side by side, she bumped my hip gently with hers. "Who would have thought this is where we'd end up?" she mused. "Remember how we used to compete for everything growing up? Dad's approval, awards at school, even who got more Christmas presents." I smiled at the memories. "You usually won." "Maybe the competitions I could see," she conceded. "But you were winning in ways I didn't understand until recently. You're the strong one, Maddie. You always have been." Her words touched me deeply. All my life, I'd defined myself in opposition to Rachel, the practical sister, the responsible one, the overlooked one. But these past months had revealed strengths in both of us that neither had fully recognized before. "We make a good team," I said simply. Rachel nodded, one hand resting on her rounded belly. "Lily's going to have the fiercest aunt in the world." As we finished cleaning up, I checked my phone to find another text from Mom. "Please tell Rachel I'd like to be involved in the baby's life. I am her grandmother, after all." I deleted the message without responding. If reconciliation was ever possible with our mother, it would require genuine remorse and accountability on her part, something she seemed incapable of offering. For now, we were creating a new kind of family, defined not by traditional roles or biology alone, but by choice. The choice to support each other, to prioritize healing over blame, to make something beautiful from the wreckage of the past. "Happy birthday, sweet girl," Rachel cooed, adjusting the tiny flower crown on Lily's head. My niece, technically my half-niece, though we never used that terminology, giggled and grabbed at the decorations, her dark eyes bright with excitement. We had gathered in Rachel's small backyard for Lily's first birthday celebration. The space was transformed with pastel balloons, streamers, and a homemade banner reading Lily's first year in Rachel's artistic lettering. Nothing like the elaborate catered affairs our mother had insisted on during our childhood, but infinitely warmer and more genuine. I looked around at our unconventional family assembly with a sense of wonder at how much had changed in a year. Dad stood at the grill, happily flipping burgers while chatting with James Wilson. The two men had formed an unexpected friendship, bonded initially by their shared experience of Catherine's manipulation, and later by their mutual devotion to Lily. Elaine was arranging cupcakes on a tiered stand, her maternal energy now channeled into being the best possible grandmother to Lily. She had retired from nursing 6 months ago specifically to help with childcare, while Rachel transitioned back to part-time work at a smaller, more understanding architectural firm. Connor moved through the gathering as Uncle Connor, a role we had all agreed made the most sense for Lily's understanding as she grew older. The boundaries had been clearly established from the beginning. He was involved in Lily's life while maintaining appropriate distance from Rachel. He held his daughter now, pointing out butterflies in the garden as she babbled excitedly. "Need any help?" I asked Rachel, who was setting up the gift table. "I think we're all set," she replied, looking around with satisfaction. "Can you believe we pulled this off? A functional family celebration after everything that happened?" The journey to this moment had not been easy. The first few months after Lily's birth had been especially challenging, with Rachel navigating new motherhood while still processing the trauma of the previous year. There had been nights when I'd stayed over, taking late feedings so my exhausted sister could sleep. Days when Connor had dropped everything to rush over when Lily had her first fever. Weekends when Dad and the Wilsons had tag-teamed baby duties so Rachel could simply take a long shower and nap. Slowly, we had created a new normal, one built on honesty, clear boundaries, and the shared priority of Lily's well-being. Our arrangement was unconventional by any standard, but it worked because everyone was committed to making it work. Mom remained the only outlier. Her attempts at reconciliation had continued through lawyers and expensive gifts, all without genuine acknowledgement of the harm she had caused. Rachel had finally sent a cease and desist letter after Mom had shown up uninvited at the hospital when Lily was born. Since then, Catherine had maintained a chilly distance, though we occasionally heard through mutual acquaintances that she had rebranded herself as the wronged party in the situation. "Have you heard anything from her recently?" Rachel asked, following my gaze to the empty chair we hadn't planned for but somehow couldn't help leaving. I shook my head. Not since she tried to get Pastor Mike to intervene at Easter. Rachel smiled wryly. Her plan really backfired, didn't it? She wanted to destroy the family, but she only destroyed herself. It was true. Mom's elaborate revenge scheme had failed in its ultimate objective. Rather than tearing everyone apart permanently, it had forged new connections that might never have existed otherwise. Rachel and I had never been closer. Dad had found new happiness and was recently engaged to Carol, a kind-hearted widow he'd met at a woodworking class. The Wilsons had essentially adopted both Rachel and me as extensions of their family. "Time for cake," Elaine called, bringing out a homemade strawberry confection decorated with Lily's name in wobbly frosting letters. We gathered around the picnic table, singing Happy Birthday as Lily stared wide-eyed at the single candle. Rachel helped her blow it out, and everyone cheered. As Dad captured the moment on his phone, I was struck by the genuine joy on every face. After cake and presents, as the afternoon mellowed into early evening, Rachel and I sat on her small porch swing, watching Lily toddle between Connor and James, who were patiently playing a simplified version of catch with a softball. "I've been thinking about dating again," Rachel said suddenly. I turned to her, surprised. "Really? That's great, Rach. Nothing serious yet. Just coffee next week with that landscape architect who's been consulting on the park project." She twisted her hands nervously. "Is it weird? Too soon?" "Not at all," I assured her. "You deserve happiness, Rachel. What about you? Any prospects since that disaster date with the radiologist?" I laughed, remembering the well-meaning but incredibly boring medical professional who had spent our entire dinner discussing the technical specifications of his department's new MRI machine. "Actually, yes. Remember Jenna's brother Ryan? We've been texting." Rachel bumped my shoulder playfully. "Look at us, putting ourselves back out there." The comfortable silence that followed was interrupted only by Lily's delighted squeals as Connor swung her gently in circles. "We should take a new family photo," Rachel suggested suddenly. "All of us together with Lily. Something to mark this moment." 20 minutes later, We were assembled on Rachel's patio: Dad and Carol, James and Elaine, Connor, Rachel holding Lily, and me. A neighbor agreed to take the picture, and we clustered together, smiling genuinely as the camera captured our unconventional family portrait. Later, after helping Rachel clean up while Lily napped exhausted from her big day, I found myself looking at that photo on my phone. A year ago, I couldn't have imagined this scene, these people together, connected by something stronger than the betrayal that had initially linked our families. "It's a good picture," Rachel said, peering over my shoulder. "We should frame it for Lily's room. What will we tell her when she's old enough to ask questions?" I wondered aloud. Rachel considered this. The truth, I think. An age-appropriate version at first, but the truth. That families come in all forms. That love isn't always simple, but it's what matters. That sometimes beautiful things can grow from terrible situations. Her words resonated deeply. From the wreckage of my mother's cruel revenge, we had salvaged something precious, a deeper understanding of forgiveness, resilience, and what family really means. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on my own personal growth through this ordeal. The overlooked older sister had found her voice and strength. The woman who had defined herself in opposition to her perfect sibling had discovered her own value. I had received a promotion at work, moved to a new apartment I loved, and was finally dating without comparing every man to Rachel's seemingly perfect relationships. The journey through this family crisis had revealed that I was more resilient, more capable, and more loved than I had ever realized. It had taught me that family isn't defined by blood alone, but by the people who stand with you through the darkest times and help you rebuild in the aftermath. As I pulled into my driveway, I received one final text from Rachel. A close-up of sleeping Lily, thumb in mouth, surrounded by her birthday gifts. The caption read simply, "Worth everything." And it was. Despite all the pain, betrayal, and loss, the journey had ultimately led to growth, healing, and a love that transcended conventional definitions of family. Not the ending any of us would have chosen, but a new beginning we had created together from the ashes of what came before. If this story resonated with you in any way, I'd love to hear about your own family experiences in the comments below. Have you ever had to rebuild relationships after betrayal or discovered surprising strength in unlikely places? Every family has its secrets and challenges, but it's how we respond to them that truly defines us. Please like and subscribe if you'd like to hear more real-life family stories like mine. And share this video with someone who might need to be reminded that even in our darkest moments, healing is possible. Thank you for being here with me through this journey. And remember that sometimes the family we create is even stronger than the one we're born into. Until next time, this is Madison Hayes, sending love to all of you, navigating your own complicated family dynamics.